The Empathicary Podcast is a Mind Garden Media podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions. I guess we're already on episode 8 of the Empathicary Podcast, and this one is called New Year, Same You. She's Sandy.
Yeah. He's Todd.
And here
we're
we go.
just the same exact people we always are. Just, well, maybe a little wackier, but, you know, that's what it'll do to you.
Did you do any New Year's resolutions?
I don't believe in them because in my whole almost 52 years, I've never stuck to one of them.
Yeah.
So I don't believe in them. I do have New Year's hopes. I do hope that, you know, I mean, let's face it, for both of us, 2022 was pretty damn rough. And so my hope for 2023 is that we can really, and we talked about this too personally with each other, that we can kind of move into a really good 2023 and make the best of what we're given this year coming up, you know?
I did not do any New Year's resolutions. But what I did do is this last full moon that we had, I did some major manifesting, which is something that I have not done in a long time.
Yep.
Really wasn't feeling up to it, to be quite honest with you, for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel as though my manifestation worked and I received some of the stuff that I've basically been working toward in manifesting and all that kind of thing. It's coming to fruition.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So
Good.
I did do that. But yeah, 2022 was rough. And to say, please let 2023 be better is not good enough because,
That's right.
I mean, that would still be a really rough 2023. And I don't know that I want that.
Well, the good news is, fingers crossed, God willing, we will be getting to hang out twice this year, which will be really cool. And Dave and I have some really cool trips planned this year. We're going to take a little 3-day weekend trip down to Pennsylvania, to Scranton and Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, because during the last quarter of 2022, while I was in the throes of my surgery and healing, I had a lot of time on my hands. And so I did a lot more genealogy, and I looked into my grandmother's side of the family. And I actually was able to get back to like the 1400s, which I thought was unbelievably amazing. I have royalty in my family.
Of course she does.
Of course I do. And just
Queen Cassandra, ladies and gentlemen.
That's right. Well, you know, you hear stories. You hear stories when you're growing up, but none of it makes sense and you don't really care. And, oh, that's wonderful. But in fact, that did turn out to be true. And another thing that turned out to be true that I had heard a couple of times growing up was that about, now confirmed 7 generations back, I am the descendant, a direct descendant of the father of Francis Slocum, who at the age of, I believe, 5 years old, was grabbed and held by the Native Americans in Wilkes-Barre. The Slocum family was Quaker, and they originated from Rhode Island. And Francis's father, John Slocum, I am a direct descendant of his. And Francis was raised by the Native Americans down. They took her in just around Wilkes-Barre, and she ended up in Indiana, lived to be 75 years old. She's very, very famous and well known. Many books, state parks named after her, a cemetery named after her. And she was known as Mackinac, or Little Bear, and ended up marrying a tribal chief, the Miami tribe, and lived her life with the Native Americans. And when her family did find her years and years later, she wouldn't leave them. She had become Native American. And so we are actually going to go down to visit the area that she was from. Some of her family members actually were killed in they call it the Wyoming Massacre, Wyoming, Pennsylvania. And there is a cemetery there and everything. So we're going to take that trip down too. So that should be pretty cool. And I'm just fascinated by the whole thing. So I'm going to do a little bit of family stuff this year. And of course, family with you, and just try to do the best I can. I think each day should be a resolution of just making each day better than you think it's going to be. So
I think the interesting thing about what you're talking about, family and generations before and all that kind of stuff, to me, that kind of stuff, especially when you're an empath, is really, really important. Because it brings you closer to your ancestors. And we talk in the woo-woo world about our ancestors, and they're communicating with us and they're trying to teach us all this stuff. It's kind of nice to know who some of them may be, instead of just thinking of this group of people that somehow are looking down upon you. Now you kind of have an idea of who some of them may be.
Yeah, there's a belief that your spirit guides a lot of them are your ancestors. And so I think it brings you somewhat closer to your spirit guides in that sense that you're now learning more about them and who they might be and why they may guide you in the direction that they guide you. And it's a very personal thing. I mean, let's face it, as empaths, a huge chunk of our life is just personal, like personal feelings, personal beliefs, personal emotions, connecting with other people and their beliefs and feelings and emotions. And so being able to kind of tie that together and make it more whole, I think is an amazing thing. And a lot of people think, oh God, I'm an empath. This is horrible. I hate to, but in a lot of ways I've learned to embrace it. And it means a lot more to me than I think I ever intended it to. And so that sort of helped me develop myself on my journey with all of this, is just opening up to that kind of stuff. So
we've talked in the past about how, especially with me, I've had so many people reach out to me in their lives and talk about, how distraught they are and how disappointed or depressed they are and all that. And for a lot of them, it kind of circles around. And I always ask the question, have you ever thought about the fact that you might be an empath? It happens so often to me. And one of the individuals, and I don't want to give out any names, but one of the individuals who I've known for quite some time, I'm going to say at least 5 years, has been on this journey. And over, I've said to this individual, might you be an empath? Have you ever thought about this? Has this happened to you? Have you tried this? Have you done that? And for years and years and years, and you know this, it fell on deaf ears. They pretend to listen. They pretend to learn. They pretend to take it in, and then they go and do the same damn thing again. And finally, what happened was I finally put the wall up. And I finally said to myself, well, listen, I've done everything I can here.
Yep.
I can't help any more than I have. I'm giving too much of myself to this situation. Wall went up. And the wall was up for quite some time. And in about 6 months, this individual finally, because I think they finally got to a certain low, they finally thought about all the stuff that I've been talking about for years. And it's like somebody just turned on a light above their head. And now all of it's making tons of sense. And they're doing the things they need to do for themselves. And one of the things that, I'm having to teach now is the wall.
Yeah.
And I've basically said, do you understand what I did to you? Do you understand that I shut you out and I turned that communication off because you have to do the same thing for yourself.
Yeah. We all have a tendency to, if there's something that is unfamiliar to us or scary to us or, completely unknown to us, we all have a tendency to deny it, to back away from it, to, kind of divert our attention in another direction, deny it. And I think that a lot of people do have empath tendencies, but once you open yourself up to the possibility of it, and I speak from my own personal experience, open yourself to it. It doesn't become as much Don't get me wrong. I know how hard it is. Todd, you know how hard it is because you've dealt with me. But once you open yourself up to it, you sort of learn yourself so much better, and you naturally learn how to compartmentalize,
Mhm.
to put the wall up. You know, people can say, sometimes people will say, oh, you know, you're just so cold. Yes, I can be cold because of the fact that I have to separate myself from things. It's like you putting up your walls. And when we first met, now we're 3 years we've known each other. When you first met me, your walls were so high, like I almost didn't want to talk to you anymore because I couldn't get in at all. And once you learn how to do that, then it makes it, I think, a little bit easier to bring them back down when you need to, with the people that you need to.
When you're ready to, when you
Right.
allow yourself to. Yes.
Yes, but we all have a tendency to do that. And sometimes I am so sick and tired of people coming to the well and not drinking. If you don't want to hear what I have to say, then don't come to me because I'm going to tell you exactly how it is. And if you don't like it, then my wall is going to go up. I'm cutting off the jam, and that's the end of it.
Wait a minute. Explain that to me. Cutting off the jam?
Just
Like-
cutting it off.
Like jelly and jam? Or jam is in
just
dance?
Like jam is in it's not pump up the jam. It's like cut off the jam. So I'm laughing at me.
Has anybody ever heard that terminology?
I
It's
don't
like
know.
that.
But the moral of the story is, sometimes you have to let people loose to make them find themselves. And if I keep coddling someone and I keep telling them something and allowing them to keep coming to me, this is advice for empaths. If you keep allowing people to do that, it's not only bad for them, but it's bad for you. And the most important thing when you're an empath, especially a strong empath like you and I, Todd, is you have to do self-care. Practice self-care. It's so incredibly important that you take care of yourself first. It's sort of like we talked about before when you're on the airplane and they tell you if you need oxygen, you put your oxygen mask on first. Then you help the other people. You have to take care of yourself first so that you can help others. And if they don't want the help, there's not much you can do.
Right.
We make podcasting easy. Mind Garden Media can get you going on your very own podcast. With many years in the broadcast and audio industry, Mind Garden Media can edit, fully produce, and provide all the web distribution services. We're podcasters too, so we'll guide you every step of the way to a professional sounding podcast production. For information, email the Mind Garden Media at gmail.com. The Mind Garden Media at gmail.com. Or check us out on Facebook.
We've been talking a lot about families and generations and relatives and all that kind of stuff. I do want to mention, not for anything other than to tie into what we're talking about, was that I recently lost my dad.
Yes.
And it was really a blessing at this point in his life because he was dealing with dementia and all that kind of stuff. And the tie-in between being an empath and having connections with your ancestors is a very interesting connection because not only do you learn about them, you can feel them,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And one of the things that makes me sad when my mom passed away, my dad passed away. A lot of people knew my parents. They were kind of like celebrities to a certain extent. But what always made me sad wasn't that they were gone. I mean, yes, that is sad, but that they wouldn't be remembered. People die and their story kind of ends. And unless somewhere down the line, I've done something very interesting with my life and somebody reads about me and they know that I did this and I did that and whatever, my story kind of ends. Okay. It may live on in some ways, but it ends. And that always made me really sad because while my parents were never perfect parents, I think they tried their best And they worked really hard at everything that they did. And when we sold the parents' house, we handed it over to a new family. And while I think they appreciate it, they can never understand how hard my parents worked to afford and buy, have the house built, maintain it, everything they did. They'll never understand that. To me, it's sad. But I do have a gift. So my father's funeral, as we're recording this, my father's funeral was Wednesday. And it was a gorgeous day. It was a great service. I walked away from that feeling better than I have felt in a long time. And part of the reason is because one of his friends was at the funeral and is still around, is actually a number of years younger than my dad. I didn't realize that, but he's like 9 years younger than my dad. And he's got the greatest stories about growing up with my father and the shit they used to do. And to see him remember my father, was a joy.
Yeah.
And to hear stories that I didn't know and now know about my father is a joy. We know our parents, I'm 52. So my father had me like when he was 40. Okay. So I knew the last 50 years of my dad's life. I didn't know the previous 40.
Right.
I really didn't. And he didn't talk a lot about it. He would tell some stories once in a while about the farm or this and that, or goats on his brother's car that went through the convertible top with their hooves and shit like that. I mean, he would tell stories, but I didn't know. And now I know somebody who has some of those things. And what I realized was, while I remember my father the last couple of years, and he was not my father at this point. I mean, he was, but he was not himself because of dementia.
Right.
My father lived a relatively really cool life. Really happy. They did a lot of fun shit, stuff that people would not get away with. I mean, certainly. And I said this to my father's friend at lunch. I said, we didn't know this side of my dad. My dad had a great sense of humor and thought things were, but with his kids, he was like, don't you do that. How dare you do that? You can't do that. You're going to get in trouble. I'm going to beat your ass, stuff like that. And then I turn around and I hear these stories about stuff that he did. Holy shit. I would be dead in the ground if I ever tried one or two of those things.
I could tell that you were coming, you were kind of coming back up the hill.
Yeah.
When we talked and you just boom, 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 laid out the story to me. And it was like right there, boom, boom, boom. And when things happen to us or when we're going through a lot of stress, you and I are very connected. So we pick up physically on each other. We pick up emotionally on each other. And that's one other lesson for empaths is you don't have to be in the same room. Or you don't have to be 5 minutes away from each other. When you're connected with someone, these are the things that can happen to you. So when you and I are going through things, we tend to kind of separate a little bit from each other, more out of love than not, because we want to spare the other one a little bit extra emotional difficulty.
Wear and tear, yep.
Yeah. And so, but with the understanding that we're always there if the other one needs us. But the point I'm making is that I could tell that you were back on the upswing a bit after that lunch. And I was so grateful for that lunch because, we only know of our parents what we see. That generation and the generation before it didn't really talk much about their lives.
Right.
I told you yesterday, my grandfather would mention here and there that my great-great-grandfather had a fruit and vegetable cart in Utica, a horse-drawn fruit and vegetable cart. And my grandfather would help him with that. And that's all I know. I didn't get to hear all the stories. And it's so hard for us because all we knew as our parents as adults, the quote unquote responsible adults, we never got to see that other side of them and realize that they were probably doing all the stupid ass shit that we do or have done. We just didn't know it. And so it kind of comes full circle at times like that. And I love the after funeral, after service luncheons and things, because that's when everybody kind of breathes a sigh of relief, says, okay, We're in the closure mode. We're coming back, and let's enjoy it. Let's talk about them, and let's remember them, and let's talk about the good stuff that happened. And it's sort of always the best way. Now, I was born and raised Catholic, and let me tell you, the Catholics, if there's anybody who can be dramatic and drag things out, it's the Catholics. I mean, you've got 2 days of calling hours, afternoon and evening, 2 full days. You've got the big, huge funeral. You've got the procession. You've got this. You've got that. You've got the huge luncheon afterwards. I mean, they drag it out for days. But the one part that I always did enjoy was afterwards, when everybody kind of relaxed and told stories. And so I was so happy that you got to share that story, because what a story it was, too. It was funny. It was sweet in that there was such a friendship, and they all just were just kids. They literally were just kids back then, and got themselves in a little bit of trouble. And it was just fantastic. So I was really happy to hear that somebody shared that kind of a story with you, because we all need that. We all need that. And one of the reasons that I, A, visit cemeteries, B, do Sandy cemeteries, anything like that, is because I want to tell their story. You know, when I go to a cemetery, I spend my entire time reading names, because I think in some small way, I'm remembering.
Right.
them.
Yep. I agree with that.
You know, I read names out loud. If I go to somebody who served in the military, I thank them for their service. It's just, I think it's the right thing to do, is to remember people. Nobody wants to be forgotten in life or death.
And I know we all believe, or I would think that most of the listeners of this podcast believe, that when we die here, when we leave our physical body, we're not necessarily dead.
Right.
But, you know, again, you still want them to be remembered for the things they've done here, good or bad.
Right.
And everybody's got both categories. You know, it's nice to think that somebody will remember it for at least a little while before, you know, those memories go away.
Exactly. So I was just very happy about that. And it really tore me up to not be able to be. Even Dave said, we were talking right after your dad passed, and he says, you know, if Todd was in Pennsylvania or New Jersey or Massachusetts or even, you know, Ohio, he's like, we would just jump in the car and go. And I thought that meant a lot to me that Dave would say that, because he was thinking the same thing. It's even more difficult when you can't be there with the people that you care about. And, you know, you and I are now family, and it's very difficult to not be able to do that. And so just the fact that you had people there who love you very much and were able to tell you something about your dad and make you happy in the end, I think that was really cool. Yeah. Really, really cool.
It's a great thing. So,
yep. So before we end the episode, I just wanted to bring up a little point. I was years and years ago, God, probably going on 8 years ago now, when I discovered that I was an empath. The only reason I knew I was an empath was because I randomly found an article on the internet, 13 signs that you might be an empath. And I checked off 12 of those 13 signs. And so with much thought and much, you know, inner reflection, I realized that I was an empath. I didn't realize that I was that strong of an empath until much more down the road when I opened myself up to it. But if you are an empath, I found this article the other day that was very interesting, because a lot of people just think of themselves as, quote unquote, an empath. There are many different types of empaths. And so I just wanted to read through them for you. I've identified with 4 of the 8. And I could possibly be part of the other ones too, but these were the ones that called to me. But I'll read them through really quick, just so that you can kind of think about it and see if you're an empath, what exactly you may be most in tune with. So the first one is a physical empath. Physical empathy is when you're attuned to other people's physical symptoms and you tend to absorb them into your own body. This goes beyond naturally contagious gestures like laughter and yawning. If your friend is in the throes of a screamingly painful migraine headache, expect to feel tension in your temples as well. So that just brought me back to when you had your illness a couple years ago and we didn't know what was going on. and you were getting these excruciating headaches. And guess what? I was getting these excruciating headaches, and we didn't at the time understand. But that's what we mean by we are very connected with each other. So I am definitely a physical empath. That is for sure. And it's not just with you. It's with other people too. The second one is emotional empath. An emotional empath is someone who picks up on the emotions of others. This can be lovely in effect, like when your friend gets a promotion and you feel their happiness, but it can also be really, really exhausting, like when you're dealing with someone who complains constantly, is negative, a narcissist, they suck up your energy and your attention. Todd, you and I both, I think that's the main one that people deal with, and you and I talk the most about. The next is an intuitive empath. Emotional empathy is often a component of being an intuitive empath without it being the defining factor. So intuitive empaths generally can sense the unspoken in terms of what's going on, and that can encompass many qualities. So basically, you actually kind of have like this almost holistic kind of superpower. You experience extraordinary perceptions such as heightened intuition, messages, animal and plant communication, as well as pick up other people's emotions. So I feel like I am definitely an intuitive empath in that I just know things. And that goes along, obviously, with the medium and psychic abilities that I have. But I do believe that I am an intuitive empath and I think you are too, because of the fact that I just know things about people. It's much more than a first impression. It's really just knowing what's going on with them. It's almost psychological in nature.
Right.
Then there are people called dream empaths, and that is people who get intuitive information through dreams that can help them or other people. That's because they're typically gifted at clearly remembering dreams, so they're able to source wisdom from them. I don't know about this one. I kind of walk the line on it only because I have had some dreams that have kind of foretold future events in a roundabout way. The one that I had a couple months ago where I was dreaming in real time, I don't know what that was. If anybody out there, any of my woo-woo friends, my psychic friends have any idea what the heck was going on with that, please let me know. By the way, an update to that, I did contact the girl who I dreamed was in the dream. She has absolutely no ties to St. Albans, Vermont. The interesting thing, though, is that when I was researching my family history, a lot of my ancestors came from the area of St. Albans, England.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a tie there or not. So that was dream empath. Then there's plant empaths. Never heard of that one. If you're a plant empath, you can accurately feel the needs of plants and connect with their essence. So maybe that's along the lines of green thumb.
Could be.
You're just like really good with them. The seventh is an earth empath. Earth empaths are rocking a similar vibe to the plant empaths in that both have their hearts tuned to nature. But while your garden variety plant empath is more attuned to indoor ferns, earth empaths more so relate to what's going on with the whole universe. Thought that one was interesting.
Yep.
And the final one is animal empath. Animal empaths are people who are always hanging with the pet at the party. They have a special connection with animals and that they can often feel their needs and communicate with them in a soothing manner. They cannot stomach any violence towards the animals and are more than likely filling their Pinterest boards with vegan recipes. So I kind of walk that line. I mean, I don't even think I walk that line. I think I am an animal empath in that I'm not quite vegan, but I am actually moving slowly in that direction. So I've always just had a way with animals. I feel their emotions. It's more than just watching those sad commercials on TV. It's really deeply being in tune with them. And I think that's so cool. So those are the 8 different types of empaths. Check it out. Maybe Google something like that on Google and see what you relate to. But I'm at least probably 4 of them, maybe more. So just thought that was interesting and thought we could leave you guys with that for this episode.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a new Sandy and Toddcast season starting very, very soon. So we'll be getting into that in the next week or so, and people can look forward to that. So if you've been missing the Sandy and Toddcast, not a problem. It's coming back, and we're talking Mainly talking about haunted locations, our favorite
Yeah.
haunted locations.
Yay! And I've chosen a few that I've personally been to, which I have some cool stories for it too. So pretty cool stuff. And I think that our first kickoff episode of the new season will be a Q&A. If you are interested in following us, we do have a Facebook page, the Sandy and Toddcast, and we also have the Empathic Harry podcast page, but we do most of our stuff on our Sandy and Toddcast page. And we have a group, Stay Weirdos, Friends of the Sandy and Toddcast. You can join there. I did put a poll up, so it looks like we're going to be doing a Q&A session for the first episode of our new season of the Sandy and Toddcast. So if you'd like to send us a message on our Facebook page or in our group, or email us. All the information's in the show notes. Give us your questions. Any random question will do. And maybe we'll get you on there.
Sounds good.
All right. That's it.
All right. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.